Welcome to Digging for Truth, presented by Associates for Biblical Research. I'm your host, Henry Smith. Today, aspiring archaeologist and pastor Bryan Windle joins us as we explore the life of Darius the Great, who is featured prominently in the Book of Ezra. Bryan, glad to have you back with us again.
Thanks so much, Henry. It's great to be back on the show. I love doing Digging for Truth episodes with you.
I'll tell you, it's a lot of fun to do it together. Okay, so we have this king, Darius the Great. We're going to do bioarchaeography. What do we call that again, Bryan? Give us the name. What do you call that?
Yeah, well, it's a term I invented, bioarchaeography, and
yes.
Don't try Googling it. I'm probably the only one who uses it, but it basically uses archaeology to tell the story of someone's life. And for us, we're going to use archaeology to see what it tells us about the life of King Darius. Now, we should probably just clarify, there are three King Dariuses who are mentioned in the Bible. There is Darius the Mede, who is mentioned in Daniel chapter 6. We're not talking about him. And then there's Darius the Persian, mentioned in Nehemiah 12:22. And that's probably Darius the second or Darius the third. We're not talking about him. We're going to talk about Darius the first, Darius the Great, he is called, who figures prominently in the Book of Ezra, as you mentioned.
Yeah, excellent. That's very good. Yeah, I can never pronounce that new word that you invented. So you always get it right, and I always get it wrong. Okay, so let's start with what we know about King Darius from the Book of Ezra. Give us a sketch of that, if you would.
Sure. Well, why don't we set the context by just going back a little before King Darius. When the Persians took over from the Babylonians, King Cyrus allowed the people of Judah to return, those who wanted to return. And some did, a lot did not, but some did. They returned to Jerusalem. And we did an episode on King Cyrus the Great, back in 2021. And when the people returned from captivity, they almost immediately began to rebuild the temple. And the enemies of the people of Judah who were in the land were not very happy to see this happening. And so they tried to discourage God's people and frustrate their efforts, pretty much from the time of Cyrus down to the time of Darius the Great, we're told in Ezra chapter 4, verse 5. And so the construction that had begun stalled. And at the time of Ezra, the time Ezra records this, Tatnai, the governor of the province called Beyond the River, that's where Judah was located, he challenged the Jews about what gives you the right, who gave you permission to do this, and then he wrote a letter to King Darius to see if indeed the Jews had permission to rebuild. And this is recorded in Ezra chapter 5, verses 6 to 17. And so Darius issued an order that the royal archives be searched to see if King Cyrus did in fact issue a decree. And we're told in Ezra 6:1 that the royal decree in question was discovered in the archives at the citadel of Ecbatana, which was an important Persian city. And so the king wrote to Tatnai and said, yes, don't interfere with the rebuilding of the temple. In fact, out of the revenue from that province, you are to give them funds to rebuild the temple of Yahweh in Jerusalem. In fact, anyone who attempts to change this edict, he says, will be sentenced to death by impaling. We read this in Ezra chapter 6, verses 3 to 12. So quite a story of the rebuilding of the temple in Jerusalem and Darius's actions in support of that.
Yeah, it's so interesting. I had to go back to the archives to find this decree. I find that whole aspect fascinating, how often sometimes do we forget about the origin of a law and of a land or something like that. Really, really interesting. So what do we know, Bryan, about his rise to power? Maybe that would be a next logical question to ask. Give us some information about that.
Well, it's a little murky how he came to power. Darius himself, while he was of royal blood through a different wing of the royal family, he was not the rightful heir to the Persian throne. We know that. He was the son of Hystaspes, who was a provincial governor. He had been serving in Egypt as a spear bearer in the famous Immortals under Cambyses II, the son of Cyrus, who was the true heir to the throne. And when Cambyses died, Darius rushed home, returned to Media, where he killed this imposter who seems to be a foreigner who had claimed to be the brother of Cambyses and who had usurped the throne. And Darius comes back into the picture, and he kills this imposter. And so we read about this in kind of the primary inscription that we have of Darius's rise to power. It's called the Behustan inscription. It's a trilingual inscription with a relief carved into a rock cliff in Iran. And he identifies himself. He says, from my antiquity, my dynasty, our dynasty has been royal. So he's claiming to have royal blood. And he claims that Cambyses secretly killed his brother, and that he was the only one, or Cambyses was killed, and he was the only one who had the courage to take out the usurper to the throne. And so because of this, he believed that the gods had given him the right to rule now. And so he viewed taking the throne back from a foreigner for the rightful people of Persia. Now, some scholars in the modern era have kind of said, there are just a lot of unanswered questions here, and some wonder whether maybe Darius himself killed Cambyses and made up this story to justify his rise to the throne. There are conspiracy theories like that, but we'll just say it was murky, but he eventually became a great king. We'll leave it at that.
Yeah, it's very good. Yeah, it's helpful to sort of fill in the background there. Now, Bryan, we have a little extra time in this first segment. I wanted to circle back to this campaign to oppose the rebuilding of the temple. And I was thinking about you as a pastor, or us sometimes in ministry where we have sort of something that God has set forth for us to do, right? And then there's opposition, and it's not just always opposition outside the church, but sometimes it comes from within our own people. Maybe comment on that a little bit, and maybe some of the application to today, because this is relevant. We're talking about archaeology, but there's this relevance here that really speaks to us.
Yeah, and I think one of the things I take away from this is the importance of having strong voices that speak up and spur people on, especially in the face of opposition. We read about this in Ezra. We read about this in Nehemiah. Haggai was another prophet who was spurring the people on to continue to rebuild Jerusalem, continue to rebuild the temple, continue to do what God wants you to do, even in the face of opposition. And that is not an easy task. It's certainly not an easy task when you seem to be standing going against the current of culture. And it's not an easy task when the current of culture seems to make its way into the church sometimes, and church leaders stand against that. And so that's one of the takeaways I take from this particular period of history.
Yeah, I agree. Not only the accuracy of it, but how that applies to us today. Very helpful. It sort of should cause us to stand firm, when we know that we're on the right course, to stick it out, because that measly little temple that seemed to be building that people were opposing, there was a purpose in all that in God's sovereign plan. I find it quite extraordinary. Well, friends, thank you for joining us for Digging for Truth. We'll be right back after this break.
Watch Lighthouse TV wherever you go. Available on Roku, Amazon Fire TV, and Apple TV. Search Lighthouse TV online on your streaming device, or go to our website, lighthousetv.org, for more information.
Hi, welcome back to Digging for Truth. I'm here with Bryan Windle. We're exploring the life of Darius the Great and the archaeological evidence related to his life and reign. Okay, let's do that, Bryan. Let's take a look at some of the archaeology, what we kind of know about King Darius.
Sure. Well, once Darius ascended the throne, as often happened in the ancient world, a new king takes over, and different areas that were under that control tried to rebel. And so he had to put down some revolts. And then once he had consolidated his power, throughout the kingdom, he started to expand his empire. And so, with a series of military campaigns, he went down into Egypt, as far as the Indus Valley, tried to invade Greece. Of course, the famous Battle of Marathon in 490 BC, the Persians lost to the Greeks there. But Darius's strength really was in administration. And so he reorganized the empire with new provinces called satrapies, and that allowed him to secure annual tributes from each province. And he used the money generally pretty well, it seems. He had ambitious building projects. He is responsible for building the famous royal road that went from one end of the empire to the other, stretched from Susa to Sardis, and that was about 1,700 miles. And apparently, there were fresh horses stationed every 15 miles or so. And it was said that in the ancient world, you could go from one end of the empire to the other in 1 week's time, which was remarkable speed at that particular time. And so, when we start looking at some of his building campaigns, the first thing that comes to my mind is Susa. Susa was the winter capital of the Persians. It had been an Elamite capital before that. And so he constructed a new palace there on one of the hills, and a new Apadana, that's the audience hall. That, by the way, is the setting for the events during the reign of his son Xerxes, who is known as Ahasuerus, in the Book of Esther. That's where that took place. It's located in modern-day Iran. And interestingly, it was apparently while he was at his palace at Susa that he got the bad news that his army had lost in the Battle of Marathon to the Greek. And so he built that palace. He also built a new royal city at Persepolis, and the ruins from Persepolis are just spectacular. Just encourage the viewers to Google them. They're just some spectacular remains that are still fairly well preserved for that period of time. It's located near the Zargos Mountains in modern-day Iran. And so you can actually see the remains of his palace, for example, and his audience hall there. And there are a number of inscriptions at Persepolis by multiple kings, by Darius, by Xerxes, by Artaxerxes. And so it appears that each Persian king kind of wanted to leave his stamp on Persepolis too, and build up other buildings there. One of the most famous reliefs, probably from antiquity, is a very famous relief from the audience hall depicting a Persian king, which is likely King Darius, and the crown prince behind him, which is likely Xerxes. And so that's just an amazing discovery. And there have been amazing discoveries at Persepolis. During the excavations in 1933, Frederick Kefter found the foundation deposits, 2 stone boxes, and inside of them were a pair of gold and silver tablets that had a cuneiform, a trilingual inscription on it, and Darius boasts of building. He says, "Darius, the great king, the king of kings, the king of the countries. This is the kingdom I hold." And he prays a blessing, "May Ahura Mazda," that was his god, "protect me and my royal house." And so, just some spectacular things that we see in the archaeological record that show Darius building up his empire, building new palaces, building his kingdom.
Yeah, extraordinary. I can imagine Krefter's eyes must have popped out of his head when he saw, when whoever found those gold tablets. I mean, that is a rarity indeed. Really great stuff. Bryan, you mentioned King Xerxes. We did an episode on him before. You did a biography of him as well. So friends, we encourage you to check that out on our YouTube channel. But let's talk about Darius as he's in the Bible, Bryan. Archaeological finds that kind of connect with the details of the biblical text. Tell us what you know about that.
Sure. Well, Darius comes into the story when Tatnai, the governor of the province beyond the river, writes him a letter asking him, do the Jews have permission to rebuild their temple? And he's wanting to double check to see if the decree of Cyrus is really true, whether that's all really true or not, what the Hebrews are telling him. And a group of Persian tablets called the Tatnu Fragment Archive have been discovered, and it includes a cuneiform tablet. It's a promissory note. It's specifically dated to the 20th year of Darius, and one of the witnesses is a servant of Tatanu, the governor of the province beyond the river. And scholars are nearly unanimous that Tatanu, the governor of the province beyond the river, and Tatnai, the governor of the province beyond the river, are the same person. It'd be rare to have the same person with the same name around the same time holding the same office. And so we have this. And it's not surprising that the governor would write directly to the king to find out something like this. We have Aramaic letters that have been discovered in which inquiries were sent directly to the king by other governors, by other people. And so what's written in the Bible about Tatnai, likely this Tatnu, we have historical evidence of him and him writing directly to the king. We have other evidence historically that was the norm in the Persian kingdom at that time.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. You mentioned the evidence from Elephantine. That's an island where Jews built a temple down in southern Egypt on the Nile River, right? And so,
Yep.
so you're drawing from evidence there and connecting it up here and the sort of the common practice in the ancient Near Eastern world. It's so interesting how these things interconnect with one another.
Yeah. And just amazing how widespread the Persian Empire is at that time when you consider that, right? We're in southern Egypt. We're going as far as the Indus Valley up, just a massive, massive empire up into Turkey at this period of time. And the evidence that we have from this period, all generally where it touches on the biblical text, I think it supports what's written in the biblical text.
Yeah, good stuff. And we're going to, in our next segment, explore more of that, friends. So thank you for joining us for Digging for Truth. We'll be right back.
Digging for Truth is produced and recorded in the studios of Lighthouse TV. Positively different.
Hi, welcome back to Digging for Truth. I'm here with Pastor Bryan Windle, who's on the ABR staff, works with us at Shiloh each year on excavations, and is taking us on another journey through the biography of a king, King Darius. Okay, so Bryan, we ended the last segment looking at some of the archaeological evidence related to the Book of Ezra. But there is some more to talk about, so I'll hand the baton back to you and let you explore that.
Sure. So when Tatnai writes this letter to King Darius, he asks whether the Jewish people have permission to rebuild the temple, and the search is made of the royal archives, we're told. And the Bible records that a scroll, that's interesting, a scroll, not a cuneiform tablet, was found in the archives at the citadel of Ecbatana. That's Ezra 6, verses 1 and 2. Persian scholar, one of the great Persian scholars is Edwin Yamuchi, and he writes this. He says, "We know that Persian officials wrote on scrolls of leather and papyrus from the remains of clay bullae found in the east, and discoveries were made in Egypt. Diodorus informs us that the Persians had royal parchments recording events of the past." And so we have even ancient authors which also support this idea of scrolls being used and royal parchments. And so it was likely one of those royal parchments, perhaps, that was found in the archives of Ecbatana. Geo Weidengren notes that the practice of keeping archives in a citadel or a fortress was a practice for centuries, and there's evidence of documents being kept in the fortress of the archives, it's called, in the Achaemenid Empire. And so this was a practice that was widespread, it appears, throughout the Middle East. And so that's kind of interesting. And then even Darius's commands in his response to Tatnai to help rebuild is known from history. Some people might say, oh, come on. Would a pagan king really help the Jewish people rebuild their temple? The short answer is yes. We see this in a memorandum from the governor regarding the rebuilding of the Jewish temple at Elephantine. Again, royal money that was used in that, it appears. And so here's what I think is behind Darius's thinking. There was tolerance and there was support for other religions of the conquered people throughout the empires. And it was almost as if Darius was trying to placate the people and keep the peace, because let's have a peaceful empire, everybody. Moreover, he was wanting the people to pray to their gods for he and his sons. I mean, that's right in the biblical text. We're told that in Ezra chapter 6, verse 10. And so this all fits with what we know of the Persian Empire at that time. And then finally, the threat that Darius gives of impaling anyone who disobeys this edict was a very real Persian threat. Herodotus records that Darius impaled 3,000 chief men when he conquered Babylon. And so we have all of these little details in the text of Ezra, which are affirmed by either other writings or archaeology throughout the region at that period of time, the Persian time.
Yeah, really remarkable. I mean, makes us think theologically too, right? About the heart of the king is in the hands of Yahweh, as it were, right? We think of King Cyrus being the most classic example, but this is what we call in theology the realm of common grace, where God works in the pagan world to provide for people even who reject him, and to provide for his people. It's really extraordinary. The kindness that God bestows upon humanity in rebellion against him, it's quite extraordinary.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, you think of the kings that God raised up to do his bidding. I think of Nebuchadnezzar, the previous empire. One could argue the same thing with Sennacherib in the previous empire to that. Yes. God really does allow and use things that we might go, why, how, and even the prophets, like some of God's prophets went, well, how could you possibly allow those people to be people who you use? And God, with the God of justice, will set all right in the end.
Yeah, that's certainly an article of faith, but an important part of our, what we call that, Bryan, theology proper, the doctrine of God, right? It's foundational to everything that we believe. We build from there. Well, okay, so let's shift back to Darius now. So in the end, what do we know about what happened to Darius the Great?
Well, what's interesting about the end of Darius's life is that we can pinpoint his death to within half a month, which is very rare in the ancient world. And the reason we can do that is because the last dated cuneiform text we have from his reign is from November 17th, 486 BC, if we convert to our modern Gregorian calendars. And the first text dated to the reign of his son is December 1st of that year, 486 BC. So sometime in the latter half of November of 486, he died. And I'm not quite sure all of the circumstances surrounding his death, but he was buried in this monumental tomb. There are a series of monumental tombs of Persian kings located northwest of Persepolis, and that's where he, we believe, was interred. And he ended his life as really one of the great Persian kings, hence the title that's given to him, Darius the Great. He inherited a loosely organized kingdom, and really through his administrative prowess left behind a well-organized empire for his son Xerxes.
Yeah, that's good stuff. Good stuff. You know, I was thinking too, the evidence that we have from basically this stuff is, a lot of this is from Iran, although it's from other areas. I just hope for the day that the political situation in Iran will transform so people from the West can go and see these extraordinary places that are there. I mean, some people get to do it, but by and large, the country's not open to Westerners. It'll be wonderful someday if we could see that. Well, Bryan, let's take a last 2 minutes here to wrap up the show and just, give us a summary of what our viewers can learn from this and why you feel it's important as a pastor.
Yeah, well, a lot of my work in pastoral ministry is with young people, and so I'm involved as a youth pastor, and so my heart really is for the next generation, and teens today, and even Christian teens who are raised in the church, many of them are harboring these secret doubts that the stories that they hear in Sunday school, the sermons that they hear preached at youth group and on Sunday mornings, whether they're really about real people or not. I mean, the kings from these foreign sounding names from these far off places can seem sometimes no more real to them than King Aragorn Elisar of Gondor in Lord of the Rings. And so, but when we look at the historical record, and if any of our viewers are interested in this period in history, Persia and the Bible, Persian history, I really encourage you to get a copy of Edwin Yamuchi's book, Persia and the Bible. It is a great overview historically of this particular period, but also ties in biblical history to it as well. So just a great resource if you're interested. And really for people who have doubts or questions about the historicity of some of these events that are described in the Bible, I really do think archaeology can help with that. The archaeology really helps me to see how historically reliable the Bible actually is, because I believe that archaeological findings, I mean, really archaeology is a relatively young science, right? Only about 150 years have we been doing systematic archaeology, and some would argue that really it's only been within the last century that we really have been doing it well. And yet, when properly understood, and where it touches on biblical history, I believe that we can see the Bible is a historically reliable document. And so that helps me to trust the things that I read, both the historical things and the spiritual things, the story of God sending his son Jesus to this earth to seek and to save the lost.
Amen to that, Bryan. Well, thanks again for another great episode and for all your hard work. Appreciate you, man.
Thanks, Henry.
Friends, thank you for tuning in to Digging for Truth today. We appreciate it. We're grateful for your support, and we hope you come back again to watch the next episode. Thank you for joining us.